Chapter 15. We've looked at the past couple of weeks about the acceptance of Christ and also the being ambitious for Christ. And now we're at chapter 15, verse 22. And here more of Paul's personal business is coming out. But now that there is no more place for me to work in these regions, these places where I planted churches, and since I've been longing for many years to visit you, I plan to do so when I go to Spain. Finally we hear him in his own words why he wants to go there, because he wants to go to Spain. I hope to see you while passing through and to have you assist me on my journey there after I have enjoyed your company for a while. Now, however, again, here gives the context. Now we know where he is and what he's doing as he's writing this letter. I am on my way to Jerusalem in the service of the Lord's people there. For Macedonia and Achaia were pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem. They were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them their material blessings. So after I've completed this task and have made sure that they have received this contribution, I will go to Spain and visit you on the way. I know that when I come to you, I will come in the full measure of the blessing of Christ. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. So Paul is a preacher, but he is also a collector. He is going around collecting money. Yes, it's for the poor, but he's still asking people to empty their pockets. I wouldn't want that job. It's hard enough just to preach, to tell people, look, you are selfish, you are helpless, you need some help. You know, that's not a good message. It doesn't get you rave reviews. But on top of all that, to say, could you empty your pockets? Right? George Whitefield was a preacher of his days. Right? And if there was Twitter in those days, then he would have the most followers. But Benjamin Franklin was a little skeptical. So when he heard that George Whitefield was coming to Philadelphia, he went to check him out. And after hearing him, he wrote this. George Whitefield, he has great eloquence that has power over the hearts and the purses of the hearers, of which I was an example. So he went determined not to give anything. At the end of the meeting, he left empty-pocketed. It was for an orphanage, actually, and he became a good friend with George. And although this agnostic remained an agnostic, they were good friends till the end. But still, asking for money, I don't like doing that. In fact, you know that. In fact, even our ST leader said, you know, Pastor, you should sometimes talk about money. Well, today, I have to talk about money. It's in the text. Right? And you know what it is? It's the association we usually have with money. Money is very corruptive, for sure, and it corrupts even pastors. So we have televangelists. Anyone talks about money, we see televangelist faces all around. I had a friend back in college who would stay up late just to watch televangelists because he found it so entertaining. So I stood up and I watched a couple with him, a couple of evenings. And just in those couple of evenings, I've seen these televangelists sell the sword of the David, a prayer rug, and a vial of tears. So what they were saying is, if you collect your tears with this vial, it says in the Psalms that God collects all our tears, and so God will collect our tears, and remember that. And if you buy this now, it will be only $10, and if you get it now, right away, then we'll throw in the prayer rug as well. Man, that is sickening. And you know what? It's there. It's there. Money is corruptive. But here, Paul is not trying to collect because he's been corrupted. He's actually combating the corruptive power of money by being disciplined. He is saying that the money, you have to fight it, not by saying ignoring it as if it's not there, because if you ignore it, it will control you. Or, of course, to put it on a pedestal, but what you need to do is you need to bring it into a spiritual discipline. And that is what Paul is doing here. Notice the language, and we'll go deeper as we go into the sermon. He's bringing it in as a spiritual discipline. As much as we think to grow in Christ is reading the Bible and praying and inviting and sharing, using the money for the kingdom is also an essential spiritual discipline. Specifically here, learning how to share with the least, or the word that he uses, learning to share with the poor. If we don't do this, you cannot follow Christ faithfully. Because at the end then, money will consume you. And so, it's an important spiritual discipline. I know he says this at the end as if it's an afterthought, but it's not. He's very wise. All this thing, okay, we're going to go language, really, it was all based upon what he's been saying about the grace of God and what the gospel means. And it's because of the gospel, Christians must live like this, sharing, especially with those in need. In fact, Tim Keller, he's maybe the George Whitefield of our days. He says this in an interview. He says, if I don't care for the poor, if the church doesn't care for the poor, that's evil. It's not the most eloquent statement, but it's powerful for its directness. If we don't care for the poor, it's evil. You cannot follow Christ unless you have this discipline of learning how to share with those in need. In fact, if you look at Galatians, we see that the whole mission of what Paul and Peter is doing is united by this act of sharing, of caring for the poor. So if you look at Galatians chapter 2, verse 8, for God who was at work in Peter as an apostle to the circumcised, the Jews, was also at work in me as an apostle to the Gentiles. Here we see that they have a different calling, different gifting. And James, Cephas, and John, the right hand of fellowship, so these are the leaders at that time, the early church, and Barnabas, the right hand of fellowship, when they recognized the grace given to me, they agreed that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. So they realized that this ministry to the Gentiles was not just auxiliary. It was part of the whole gospel movement. And this was legit. But here's what unites them. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I had been eager to do all along. It was essential to the gospel ministry. As much as the gospel was changing according to the culture that it was engaging, what would unite this gospel to the Jews and the Gentiles was this fundamental spiritual practice of sharing with the poor. And what Paul is doing in Romans is exactly what he's promised to do as we see through the letter of Galatians. It wasn't an afterthought. As much as he realized he has to preach, he also needed to collect, to teach this essential spiritual discipline of sharing with those in need. And think about this. This is amazing what Paul is doing. This is sharing in a massive scale. This is the first international charity organization, ad hoc, but yeah, that's what it is, right? You are having people in Greece, 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem, and this is way before, again, any communication phones. This was traveled by foot and by boat. They are collecting money to give to the poor who they've never seen and they will never see. They didn't even see a picture on the internet, and they're giving it to them. Why? Because they were Greek expatriates? Was there some commonality? No. No commonality except what? The experience of the gospel. Where the gospel is, you are not my people, Gentiles, but now I'm going to call you my people. And so the Gentiles had the obligation to look at the Jews as, you are not my own, but now you are. This amazing international charity organization began because they've experienced the gospel. They realized what the gospel was claiming upon their lives. In fact, one historian says, right now, today it's a norm. This international charity, something happens in Haiti and everybody's responding. He's saying this type of movement, this international charity organization, where we're going beyond our geography and our culture, you want to know how it started? Look at the first Christians. This is where it started. In fact, even today's very effective modern organizations like Compassion International, it has been shown that what they do with the kids is effective. And also Kiva, that's something that I've shared with you before. It's about micro-lending without interest, so that money goes, so that person can use that to build their own personal family businesses, and so they could come out of the poverty. These two were started by Christians. This was a fundamental way of living out the Christian. And in fact, this was what really drew the people. Why did church grow so much? Was it because they could speak their religious message better than all other religion? No, it wasn't. To an extent, the gospel made more sense, but it wasn't so much the power of the eloquence or even the idea, but it was the idea seen in practice. These Christians would go to a city when everybody was leaving because there was a plague. And these Christians would share with the poor. They'd never seen it. Peter Brown is a historian in Princeton University, and he talked about Christianity and late Roman society. And he talks about how the poor, actually, the Roman society, and he talks about how the Roman society at that time looked at the poor and how the Christians looked at the poor, and what they did was significantly different. He terms it Christian care and classic care. And the classical care was basically this: the rich and the wealthy. And what they do is they don't so much distinguish between the people who are in need. In other words, they didn't see poor as a class because they deserved where they were. It was dismissed and judged. And so the only type of goodwill they would do is basically, with their money, give for public usage, meaning building parks, things like those. But as far as helping the poor, but the Christians come and they say the poor is beloved. See, there's no judgment in the category. No matter what had happened to lead to poverty, they're not judging the poor as deserving, but as one who deserves the love of God. And this, he says, in his own words, right? In one sense, he says, the Christian bishops created the category of the poor. And you see in today's reading, did you see where Paul goes? We are collecting all this money to give to the poor of the saints in Jerusalem. That's huge. Again, in that time when the poor were dismissed and thought they deserve what they have, Paul goes, the poor of the saints. They're deserving because of what God had done for us. Not of our judgment, but of our love. This was why the church grew so quickly, like wildfire. And I shared this quote with you guys, right? Julian, the emperor, the apostate, he has come to be known, and he wants to bring back the pagan days, and he tried to find, combat Christianity, and what he did is he sent a letter to all the pagan priests, and in that letter he says, the reason for this amazing progress of the superstition of Christians is because these Christians care for strangers. They care for the poor, and not just for their own, but even ours as well. It was because of that these Christian superstitious people were growing. And actually the enemy had a very truthful observation. This is why the church grew. Because the church knew that this was essential to the gospel. And you know what? Especially today, you and I, we need to practice the spiritual discipline of learning how to share. Especially today, because today, more than ever, money is encroaching on everything. Did you hear about last week about an intern, University of Michigan graduate, Bank of America intern? He was working 3 shifts of almost near 24-hour cycle, and he died in London in his showers. He died, 21. And we look at that and we're like, oh man, that's tragic. No one would do that. But let me ask you, trying to get money and dying at 21 and trying to get money at 41, is there a real difference? Or even if you get to 81 and you have a really good nest egg, is there a real difference between dying for money at 21 or dying for money at 81, when in the unrelenting march of time, the difference is not even a blink of an eye? If at the end, you did not change the world in the way in which you could have done because you were created for that, because you were running after money. 21, 81, not much of a difference, is there? We live in a world where money is encroaching. And because money does that, money doesn't just want to remain as a tool of exchanging goods and services. It wants to get its hands on everything. It wants to be our God. And thus, Jesus, who was never a fan of duality, like the Pharisees were, right? Good and bad, circumcised, uncircumcised. But he says very clearly, you can only love God or money. You cannot love both. Because money is never satisfied of just being a tool. And now you might think this is just a pastor speaking. Of course, all pastors will speak about money is evil and all that stuff. Okay, not that money is evil. Again, the love of money and money becoming more than it really is. Michael J. Sandel, he's a political philosopher in Harvard. He just wrote a book published, What Money Can't Buy. And the reason why it's that title is because he says we live in a society. We're moving from market economy to market society. And what's the difference? Market society is when the market is encroaching on every aspect, this is his quote, every aspect of human endeavor. And so it's remaking the social relationships into the image of the market. We've come to a point where we think everything can be bought with money, and that is dangerous. And this is I'm talking about a political philosopher, okay? Let me ask you a question. Is it okay to cut the line? Is it okay to cut the line? Right? Whether it be school bus line, cafeteria line, DMV line, is it okay to cut the line? No, right? Part of waiting your turn is fairness. We teach that to our kids and we practice it. But what about this? You go to the Disney and those theme park rides are a long line. And then if you buy a ticket more expensive, you get to the front of the line. The express lane, they call it. Is that fair? Is that fair? Okay, see, now most of us will say, and this is where market society has even really grabbed us, why not? They bought it, it's their right. They're not using any physical force. So then if a bully cuts the line in the cafeteria without ever punching, but just using the eyes, is that okay? Oh, no, they're different. You notice that the way we justify buying cutting in front of the line is this. Because they could afford it. You see how the question of affordability supplants any question about good or wrong. Okay, then what about this? In Beijing, especially those hospitals where they have really good doctors, do you know that people line up to get an appointment for the doctors, especially poor people from the villages, right? They need to see the specialist. They need to go, have that diagnosis. And so they would wait in line, sometimes days, to get the appointment tickets. Now, some people said, you know what? There's a good money to be made. And people will buy those appointments and sell it from tens to even hundreds of dollars. The scalpers for appointment tickets to the doctor. Is it right or wrong? This is in his book, right? Now, scalpers for baseball tickets and scalpers for appointment tickets, the process is the same. It's marketing, right? But you and I know at that point, you have crossed the line. It's not the same. And he's saying, my son says, this is where we are heading towards, where everything is made up in the image of the market. And you and I, we're in that drift. He says there's two dangers to this. One is inequality. What happens is this inequality becomes so big, and then there's such separation. What happens is that now you begin to have hierarchy of being. Right? Now you judge people's value according to the money and what they can do with it. Right? And so even skyboxes, a lot of our stadiums, they have skyboxes, right? Skyboxes, they're extremely expensive. Jonathan Cohen, he's one of a journalist, a writer, he says, skyboxes is not just a cozy frivolity. It actually speaks to an essential flaw in America. There's a writer, okay, not a pastor or preacher, essential flaw in America where the elite are eager, even desperate to separate themselves from the rest of the crowd. So the point there is not that, some people make more money and so everyone should make it equal. What it is that leads to such a difference of life and wanting to create the difference of life that you no longer have any public space in which a person can meet face to face as a human being. And that's dangerous. It's very dangerous, of course. It creates stress and a fracture and eventually break down as a society because you are judging people by the monetary value. And that is definitely anti-gospel. All right, so we might think, professional sports, of course, they're there for profit, but college is different, right? College, University of Michigan, they had a vote in 2007 whether they should, as they renovate their football stadium, whether they should have skyboxes. And many alumni protested against this. And one alumni wrote this, very eloquently, right? He says that college football, especially University of Michigan football, stands for democracy, okay? Now, for those who don't like University of Michigan football, you might disagree, okay? But this is for democracy, and it's the only place where, he goes, an auto worker and a millionaire can sit side by side and cheer for their team. They voted for the skyboxes, $86,000 for the skybox suites. Even towards college, but we say, hey, it's the same thing. Is it? Every area is different. See, when we get to that place causing such great inequality, we begin to judge people, and that's anti-gospel. When we live in a world where the homeless has no protection from the law, but the rich can go scot-free, that's anti-gospel. Because we believe that a homeless man who walked the Palestinian dirt roads was Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. My second danger, he says, so there's inequality. Second danger is this. He says what happens is this encroachment, again, it redoes the whole social value. And so now what happens is that there's no good, there's no sacred things. So everything is up for sale. Now, you and I, we know this too, right? There's some things when money comes in, it just destroys it. It takes away its inherent goodness and sacredness. A simple question. Would you want to buy your husband or your wife's love? Would you want to buy a spouse to marry? Would any of us want that? You wouldn't, right? Why? What happens if you can buy another woman or another man's heart and love? It actually makes that love worthless, doesn't it? If you could buy love, then it's made worthless. When you put a price tag to it, it becomes worthless. Right? Now, some of the guys might say, you know what, but it did cost me a lot of money to get her to marry me. Like, the vacations and the dinners and the big stone. You're right. Money is a way of communicating, valuing. One of the ways, not the only way. And it definitely is not the way to judge and give value. Value is inherent. Money doesn't give it. See, that's the second danger, and probably the more greater danger. Because when it goes in, everything is thought in dollar signs and market. And it corrupts the good and the sacred. And perhaps the most extreme example would be this, right? I mean, slavery. What's that? In slavery, a human being has a price tag. And once it has a price tag, what happens is that the master can beat, even kill, without any punishment from the law, because it has a price tag. Now, we have gone beyond slavery, that physical slavery, but we are entering a world where slavery is not maybe the steely chains on our ankles, but it is these deceptive lies that holds our mind when we think everything is up for sale. We might be entering into that world. Right? There was a new, in actually North Carolina, Barbara Harris started an organization. She's looking at all these people, these drug-addicted women giving birth, and sometimes these kids, when they're born as an addict. And she said, we must do something. So her intention was good. And her solution was this: give mothers $300 if they will accept sterilization. Intention is good, but that's a market economy solution. What happens when you do that? And the question is then, the Nazis forcing sterilization, and then this organization offering $300 for sterilization. What's the difference? Especially for a drug addict who cannot make the decision, and $300 the next shot. What's the difference? And that's what we're heading towards. Again, a couple, a man and a woman, and they put it up in eBay to sell the naming rights of their kid to any company for $500,000. The heart was good. Buy a house for the kid, okay? And it's okay. What if it's called McDonald's for the rest of his life? He will have the house. No company actually bought it, for the $500,000 they asked for. But think about that. Isn't that slavery? And if any of us mind is already saying, but you know, that's kind of savvy. Maybe I should do that. So that's already because you're thinking, again, you and I have drifted into this market society where, hey, if it makes monetary sense, that it must be okay. We do all this for money. We're willing to sell our kid's name for money. So what is money? What is money? So here's a $1,000 check. A $1,000 check. And if I rip this up, is this okay? How come no one's cringing like $1,000? You probably know it's the pastor's money, it's going to bounce. That paper means nothing, right, unless I sign it. So we know. $1. What if I rip this $1? Would anybody? $1 gets you nothing. So what if I rip a $20? Honey, don't worry. I think I can tape this up, okay? Don't worry, okay? I think it's still usable, okay? We think this is usable. Why? It's a little different, right? It's not because the $20 paper is actually a paper worth $20. It's because we agree cash is one way and check is another way. So Peter Waite, he's a Northwestern psychologist, he says, money is a shared illusion. Why do we need it? It serves an existential function to give order. So we can feel like the universe is measurable. It's a shared illusion. It's a sense of order, because we need that. And but what happens is when you then have this money and you really buy into it, and he's talking about not just having money, but even the idea of money, what happens is, there's positive things, like people become self-reliant and confident, but that also leads to selfishness. And it also leads to, again, what actually Michael was talking about, Michael J. Sandels, the taking the sacred and turning it into market value, upturning the social relationships. That's what money does. All this for this. We're selling ourselves for what is a shared illusion. And we think this is the fundamental reality upon which we're going to sacrifice everything. My health, my relationship, my spirituality, even my kid's name. And in today's reading, Paul and the Christians do the opposite, don't they? So the world, what it does is they take everything good and sacred and turn it into market value. How much does it cost? Can you afford it? Then do it. And what they do is they take a market term and they give it spiritual significance. The word koinonia is the word that we and I, Christians, if you grew up in the church, we use it for fellowship. And we used to think fellowship is about we go down, we chat, and we drink coffee. That's important. Chatting and coffee eventually leads to confession, right? But the root term for koinonia is this, partnership in business. We're in this partnership together. We share the profits and the losses. And what the Christians did was they took this business term and they spiritualized it, which is saying that the market stuff is dependent upon the spirituality of God. And say koinonia is about, and again, you read it carefully, what he's talking about is spiritual unity first and foremost. And because we share in this he says, koinonia in the spiritual blessing, thus we should also share in material blessings. And when you do this, when you share, when you give, you are giving offering, worship, he mentions, to God as the first fruits. See what he's doing? He's combating that of trying to change everything sacred into money, and he's saying money must be dependent upon what's sacred. The spiritual reality of God, loving God, and the call to use this illusion, which at best is just a tool to help us to share the goods and services. Friends, this is what we are called to do. We must resist. It's a resistance movement in one sense against the tyranny of money. Not to die for money, but to live for God using money as one of the tools. Okay, so real quickly, we're already doing this, okay? You guys are already giving offerings. That is great. Our ST, our church tithes all the money that you guys give as offering and we use in the church. We tithe that to support missionaries, local missionaries, about 9% plus. And then about $100 a month we have in our budget. So anyone off the street, when they come and they need help, gas, then I go and fill up the gas. $100 per month. We're doing that already, and that's great. Also, some of you guys already adopted a Compassion Child. That's great. Or some of you guys did the Link. Do you remember Link, North Korean refugees? They came here. It's $9 a month. You guys are already doing that. That's great. Kiva, as I said, mentioned. And all these things I'm going to share with you through the city. That's great. And because you guys are all doing this, I'm going to be very bold and challenge you, okay, today. Because we don't want to live chained by money. We want to live free as the people of God. So this is the first thing, okay? If you're not tithing, tithe. Simple as that. Because it's a way of saying that, again, this doesn't belong to me and I'm not chained by it. Now, as an organization, does it help the church? Of course. And I want this church to grow because I want to plant hundreds of churches like this to combat cultural prejudice and racism. I want to do that, of course. And money is important. Yes, it's true. But more than that, it's your souls and my soul. Money is deceptive, friends. Unless you draw a line somewhere and you say, this is how I'm going to be faithful to God, you will not do it. Tithe. Number two, if you haven't adopted a Compassion Kit, do it. It's been shown as effective. $38, every one of us can afford $38. And $38 will help a kid to grow to be a strong person. A one life, which is as important as your own life. Kiva is another thing that I've been doing, and it's really good because you just get even $50, and it's always coming back, and you're not making any profit, but you are, so far, I think with only $45, I've already helped, not on my own, with other people, 3 families start their personal businesses. Do something like that. Yeah. And then lastly is this. We have the city, right? If you're not in the city, every one of you is invited right here. If you're sitting, you're getting involved in the city. It's in the back of your bulletin. And there's a need. In that need, share. Share your needs. Don't be afraid. Okay? And also, when you see those needs, give those needs. And again, we're doing this, but what if we really do it full-heartedly? Like, wouldn't it be great? Let's say a kid wants to buy a clothes and he wants to buy name brand, and you said that's name brand, it's $100, and then you teach that kid, you know what? Name brands, it doesn't matter. That's part of the whole market society. Say what? I'll explain to you later. But what about this? We take the $100, you choose what family you want to invest that money to. Which family do you want to invest the money to? And then let's see if there's other people in the family, a family in this community who might have the dress similar to that. And you see what's happening is that person, the kid, is of course learning, sharing the joy of it, making her own decision, okay, learning to share and use resources. But more than that, even by that very act, you are also combating where most of these clothes are made from. You know this, right? Right? Sweatshop factories. Even just a few months ago, right, in Bangladesh, a warehouse burned and many people died. Our clothes come from that. So we can't just be in the drift and think this is the way the world is. No, we're created to be more than that. We have greater power than that. You and I. Scott Todd, one last thing, a molecular biologist, had a great professor position, and then he saw this poster, Compassion. He remembers having seen the poster when he was young, and he sees it again. He says, you know what, this is what I want to do with my life. And he goes to the wife and says, this is what I want to do. And she said, let's go for it. And so he leaves that comfort and he becomes a compassion worker. And the first job he has is just helping volunteers. So he goes to this guy, brilliant guy, goes to a Christian rock concert, teenagers, handing out water bottles to volunteers. And then one of the more regional doctors sees him and, hey, thank you for working so hard. What do? I do all this. What? You do all that? Well, we need your help with the HIV/AIDS program that we're having. And right now, he's the vice president of Compassion International. But you see, he wasn't shooting for that. He's like, as a Christian, I can help the poor. And the simple thing, even just helping volunteers, I'm going to do it. We were not created for money. We were created for God.